Okay, I guess we can start. So, Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, spoštovani, spoštovane, dobro jutro, good morning. This is one of several panels on digitalization, and it's titled Digital and Transatlantic Cooperation, a Way Forward to CEE's Resilience and Economic Recovery. This year's strategic forum is putting a lot of emphasis on digital cooperation, transformation, and as I mentioned, there's been one panel already yesterday. There's going to be several more today, and we're going to focus on this topic also in the next hour and a half. In these pivotal times for the European and global digital ecosystem, both in technology, regulation, economic recovery, and fundamental freedoms, it is crucial that we have an open and progressive debate on the challenges of our digital future. That's why I'm proud to welcome our truly distinguished panelists. With us this morning are Mr. Boris Andrijanič, Minister for Digital Transformation of the Republic of Slovenia. Welcome, Mark. Ms. Marta Poslad, Head of Public Policy and Government Relations for Central and Eastern Europe and Transatlantic Policy Lead at Google. Marta, welcome. Oh yeah, one more thing, guys. When you want to talk, you just have to press the button so that this becomes red. There you go.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Petr Očko, Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Industry and Trade of the Czech Republic.
Good morning.
Dr. Francis Burwell, Distinguished Fellow, Senior Director at McLarty Associates, and Fellow at Atlantic Council.
Good morning. There we go.
And last but not least, Mr. Fredrik Erixon, Director of the European Center for International Policy, Political Economy.
Good morning.
Good morning. So before we continue with the questions, let me just give a brief introduction of the topic we're going to be covering today. Central and Eastern European countries have much to gain from digitalization. It can provide an impetus for renewed and vigorous growth and development. In light of the region's geostrategical position, digitalization is also an important piece of the puzzle to raise its resilience. Regional cooperation on infrastructure funding, harmonization of standards, overcoming language barriers, as well as policy coordination between the EU, US, and other allies can facilitate the creation of economies of scale, thus enhancing the chances of a successful digital transformation. Supporting ambitions towards a more competitive, inclusive, and green Europe with a human-centered approach to digitalization and safeguarding democracy is another of the EU's major goals. These values can best be fostered by working together with like-minded countries and allies, and with a strong, open, and progressive transatlantic cooperation. Ensuring that the future global digital standards reflect the EU's values of democracy and human rights will require a concerted effort, not only by the EU, but also by other digitally advanced countries. Conversations around new digital regulation and introduction of new technologies, such as artificial intelligence, cannot be held in European isolation, and we must ensure that our governance frameworks are matched and reflected by the real needs in our digital societies. By this, I will turn to Minister Andrijanič for our opening question. Mark, what must we do in CEE, and generally in European Union, but let's focus on our region, to become more than just digital clients, but rather also digital partners on the global scale?
Thank you so much, Jaka. Good morning, everyone. Dobro jutro. It's great to be here with all of you. There was a pleasant surprise waiting for all of the speakers when we came to the panel. It's a very interesting book, and it's about the Congress of Ljubljana that took place in 1821. And in that year, the dignitaries from all over Europe descended upon Ljubljana to decide the future of post-Napoleonic world order. They were facing a big dilemma, whether to move forward with progressive ideas, whether to open up for new thinking or stay regressive and old-fashioned, as Europe was in the years behind those Napoleonic Wars. 200 years later, and that's the funny part, we face a very similar dilemma in a very similar location. We're back in Slovenia, and with the presidency of the Council of the EU, we are facing a very similar dilemma. A dilemma, which Europe we want. Will it be an open, innovation-friendly, progressive Europe that's not just a great client and an amazing market for other, mostly foreign tech companies, or will it be a breeding ground for our own digital champions? And I think this is one of the key dilemmas of today's time, not just when it comes to our presidency, but all of us in general. Now, CEE has a lot to learn from the Western Europe, and the Western Europe has a lot to learn from CEE. We've been discussing yesterday during the Night Owl session how the CEE, for decades now, remains the economic power engine of Europe. Our growth rates are simply spectacular. We were alluding to CEE being the Asia of Europe last night, with growth rates being around 5 or 6, even 7% in some countries in the past decades, and about many of these countries never experiencing a recession until the COVID-19 hit. Now, that's simply amazing. And when we're talking about the CEE and the digital transformation, I love to remember the tale of Estonia, which is quite telling. 30 years ago, when Estonia became independent, it was one of the poorest countries on the planet. Its GDP per capita equaled the one of Papua New Guinea. Half of the people didn't even have a phone connection, a landline. And the only connection with the outside world was a Nokia, not a smartphone, but a mobile phone at the time, hidden in the backyard of the foreign minister. Now, fast forward 30 years, Estonia boasts 4 unicorns. They have the largest number of startups per capita. They're an extremely digitally advanced country, and they made the name for themselves in Europe and the world. Now, not every country in CEE is Estonia, and Estonia is a very specific country in many ways. But I would still argue that many of our countries in CEE, including the big ones like Poland, have taken a very pro-innovation and open approach to new technologies and progress in general. Now, many argue that the economic boom in CEE is due to the EU funds, the proximity to Germany, and so on and so forth. And it's all true. It's all absolutely true. But I would say that these traditional drivers of growth are wearing out, and they're being, I would say, compensated, or they're being enriched by trends in the digital transformation. And it's great to see that CEE is becoming a tech hub for the broader region. We host a number of R&D centers of companies such as Google, Amazon, IBM, and we managed to create a lot of our own regional and soon to become global tech champions. So I would say that, again, there are a lot of lessons to be learned for everyone. And the second point that I would like to make is that CEE has been traditionally more open to change for historic reasons. As I mentioned yesterday during the Night Owl session, we don't fear reforms. We've been doing them for 30 years. We've gone through tremendous change 30 years ago, whereas other parts of Europe might be a bit more reserved when it comes to bigger changes in their political, social, or economic systems. And I think that has worked in our favor very well. Now, the last thing that I would mention is that CEE has always had a different attitude towards the US and transatlantic partnership. I think, unlike some other parts of Europe, we find it absolutely vital, not just for economic prosperity, but also for our security. And here I would like to allude to the famous saying by Henry Kissinger, who stated, "Even a paranoid can have real enemies." Now, I'm not saying that we're paranoids in the CEE, but we have a historic experience like no other part of Europe. And we are, in many ways, be it in cyberspace or in other matters, way more threatened by external powers than, for example, Portugal. That would be it.
Mark, thank you so very much. We're going to come back to the Poland and Estonian examples a little bit later on, but when you were talking about Henry Kissinger, there's another thing he said very famously. When I want to talk to Europe, who do I call? You remember that? Well, he's still alive, so. But that was way back when he was National Security Advisor. When I want to talk to Europe, who do I call? And when we talk about digital regulation.
You call the Slovenian government.
You call the Slovenian government right now. Okay, you call Mark. My point was that, you know, when we're talking about, for example, regulation, there's also a very big need that we have a, you know, European approach, that we come together with different views and different positions we have, and we have different positions on many files, but we'll come back to that as well. Marta, if I may continue with you. Mark touched on importance of transatlantic relations. I also mentioned that in the introduction of the panel. I would like to hear your view. You're also the lead for transatlantic policy at Google. I would like to hear your opinion on importance of transatlantic cooperation in the light of global digital market. Please, Marta.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaka, and thank you, Mark, for this intro comment. So, I think nothing speaks better for that significant as the price tag attached to the annual commercial sales that is happening between Europe and the US, and that's currently, I think, beyond $6 trillion every year, 16 million jobs, digital jobs on the both sides of the Atlantic, and needless to say, like you pointed out, how many success stories we see in Europe based on making most out of US technology available. I think there are two discussions that are often very conflicting and happen in parallel. On the one hand, we're talking about how to make Europe more attractive for digital entrepreneurs, how to get to the point where we can have our own unicorns, where Europe would not be tagging along after the US and China and would have its own space. And to me, it feels like there is no other way for Europe and there's no other way for CEE than to work with the US, because at the same time, above this discussion, there's the discussion about all the threats and all the risks posed by bad actors. So to me, there's a fundamental existential reason why Europe and the US should be working together, and that is security. And many parallel discussions happening today are touching upon that issue as well. Two, there is a great foundation to continue that work. Three, we got back with the new U.S. administration. We got back to multilateralism. We got back to again having forums where those conversations can happen. And this is exactly the right time for both ecosystems to come together. Most importantly, based on shared values. There are no two stronger allies globally than Europe and the U.S. We may have some differences, but we share vital values. So I'm sorry, I'm not leaving more space for doubt, but that sounds like the best way forward.
Thank you so much, Marta, for your introduction. Mr. Očko, if I may turn to you now, come from Czech Republic, from the Ministry of Industry and Trade. So if we can turn a little bit also to the economic and business impacts of our cooperation, our position in European Union. So how can, in your opinion, Central and Eastern European countries harness the digital power of an economic leap, for an economic leap forward? How can we've seen the example of Estonia, Poland. How do you see that in Czech Republic? How are you using that to have an economic leap forward, not just a step, please?
Yeah, good morning again. And first of all, I would like to thank very much for invitation to this debate, to this very important debate, and also congratulations to Slovenia and Slovenian presidency that Bled Strategic Forum this year is really, really actually the event that actually the EU speaks about. And I also wanted to say for the beginning that I'm also happy to be here because of the fact that the Czech Republic will have a presidency of EU Council in the second half of 2022. So actually I'm very happy to share views and actually learn from our Slovenian colleagues what to do or what not to do and how to cooperate with key partners like European Commission or other partners in Troika to achieve goals that we would like to achieve. I think we all agree that definitely increased competitiveness of the EU is one of the goals. Actually, keeping the democratic values, human-centric approach, and so on are very important points, and definitely we could add many more. It's not easy, and definitely digital regulation, digital agenda will be big priority for the Czech presidency of EU. Maybe not to forget, I would like to invite you already now presidency conference that will be dedicated to digital in the beginning of November 2022. Yeah, works. Because lots of legislative files that are now on the table will be in the final phase. So actually we are preparing for that, and by this I'm actually coming to your question. Actually, for us in the Czech Republic, we are a small open economy that is traditionally very, I would say, industrial, and industrial in 21st century means actually with also high ratio, high investments into digitalization of industry. It really means doing everything against building the wall around the EU. That's I think something that everyone who listens and reads the positions of the Czech Republic at the Telecommunication Council and Compet Council knows, and we are looking for like-minded countries. We definitely believe that we can find in such like-minded countries in Central and Eastern Europe. We do not believe, we actually know, because we have very good cooperation with most of the Central and Eastern European countries, and I think the worst thing that we could do in Europe is really to build the fortress Europe, and I think the danger is here again. Actually, this is what you said in the beginning. Actually, for many years, actually, it was not so strict, and the transatlantic relation was kept in very good shape. Actually, now on both sides of Atlantic, we can say that actually we need to actually take care about this and take care more intensively than before. So maybe this is a very general answer to your question, but I think this is the most important thing that we need to do. The B to this is also that actually something has to happen. Something has to happen. Some regulation in digital has to happen, and we need to work on it to actually protect citizens, to actually protect human rights, but on the other hand, not to jeopardize the innovative environment. And I think the best thing we can do is actually align our intentions in regulation of digital on both sides of Atlantic as much as possible. So I'm very happy that TTC is starting to work, but we are actually curious what will happen, how it will work. And one more thing I want to say. Of course, we would like, and the Czech Republic actually, or maybe I put it in this way, in Czech Republic we have for 2 or 3 years new innovation strategy that is actually chaired by my minister, Mr. Havlíček, that is called Czech Republic Country of Future, and we very consequently and very extensively push for a value-added economy, value-added investments, digitalization, and so on. So we would like to get more details on value-added investments based on digital technologies, or in some cases not. I'm saying that because we have Google here, we have, of course, our friends from the other side of Atlantic here. And I think that what would help is that we would see more big tech engagement in value-added presence here in Europe, actually. So this is something that would definitely help to actually work on closer cooperation in this Transatlantic relation. That will be definitely crucial to set up actually working digital regulation framework in the world. And the very last thing I wanted to say, we know, and I very much agree with Marta Poslad that she said that actually US and the EU are actually natural partners, and we know that there are other parts of the world. And if we do not cooperate, we do not cooperate in value-added investments in regulation, the other parts of the world will win. So I fully agree with that, and definitely Czech Republic will be very happy to support this idea.
Thank you very much. There's more than 20 files, large digital files on our table as we speak during Slovenian presidency. And a lot of those files will come on your table during your presidency, and it's very interesting to hear your position. Thank you very much on the inclusiveness also of all stakeholders in this process. Dr. Burwell, Mr. Očko touched on TTC. He touched on importance of transatlantic cooperation in many fields, in many aspects. So let me, as the only American here today at this round table, let me ask you the following. How can the US and EU best build cooperation on digital and tech issues? How much do they differ in a way? And is the TTC, for example, an opportunity to move from differences to consensus? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for this opportunity. Thanks to the organizers. I think we're now at a very crucial point in terms of US-EU tech and digital relations. As has been mentioned, the Slovenian presidency, the remainder of that, the French, and then the Czech presidency, this is really the key time period when we are going to see how policy evolves on this side of the Atlantic. And also, I think, in Washington, D.C., where we have a very lively discussion underway. And it's crucial that we find a way forward together, first for the reasons that Marta spoke about. This is the growing part of our economies for both of us, and we need to reinforce the transatlantic bridge, if you will, there. But also because we're not the only ones who are out playing in the global economy, and there are others who have very different perspectives on how that global digital economy should be run. But we do start from very different places, and I think that it's good for us to acknowledge that and to start from that basis. In the United States, we have traditionally been very hands-off. Not on regulatory policy generally we have been, but also there's not this consensus that there is in Europe that the digital economy requires special rules. We don't necessarily see it that way. There is now a very active discussion about certain companies and the way that perhaps there should be more regulation. But if you look at the Biden administration's approach through its executive orders on supply chains, the positions of people that it has appointed, and most recently the president's executive order on competition policy, this is about the entire economy. Europe's COVID recovery is about Green Deal, digital, and really focusing on those two big priorities. Ours is about infrastructure, the whole ball of wax of infrastructure, and social welfare. And when you look at the competition executive order, it's also about agriculture, trains, transportation, all sorts of different things. The way we approach the digital tax issue is to make it a whole tax issue, if you will, in the OECD. So there's a very different way of looking at what regulation should be doing. we also are set up very differently bureaucratically. When I travel around Europe, it's not unusual for me to run into ministers of digitalization, right? We don't have anybody like that. And so the question that Henry Kissinger asked can be reversed. If you want to talk digital policy to the US government, who do you call? And I think that's, when you look at the TTC, we have 3 co-chairs, and the Commission has 2. And it's clear to me that Vestager and Dombrovskis are much more aligned than when you talk about Blinken, Raimondo, and Tai. So I think that that's something we're going to have to deal with internally. There is also this issue of digital sovereignty. And I think that the question that we have is how much is this rhetoric and how much is it reality? It's very much linked in the way that it's been presented to strategic autonomy in the foreign and defense field. And I'm a big fan of that, but I have to tell you that in Washington, strategic autonomy leaves even friends of the EU saying, autonomy from whom? From us? And so I think there's some spillover in that debate to the digital sovereignty debate. Is it just about building and reinforcing tech capabilities, semiconductors and things like that? Or is it about discriminating against non-EU firms, who by happenstance will be mostly American firms, at least at the moment? So I think that that is part of that rhetoric is part of an overhang that we need to talk about. And I think the countries of Central Europe can be key in making that debate a more positive one than it has been. The TTC offers us a really good opportunity for addressing the positive agenda. So we know that in late September, they're going to talk about supply chains, they're going to talk about cybersecurity, resilience in supply chains, all great. I expect that we will see the TTC continue to play a big role in that discussion. But let's not forget that it's also the Trade and Technology Council. In fact, trade comes first. So it will actually probably focus more on that than it will on the digital side. It's also not clear to me how it will relate to the conflicts that we have going on. We have a very serious issue in terms of data transfers that's becoming increasingly urgent. And it's a very technical and legal issue, and it's not clear to me that the TTC is the right.
Oops.
Okay. Balanced, yes, yes. It seems to me the digital services taxes, we have kind of an agreement at the OECD. Let's see if the digital services taxes here that have already been implemented are repealed, removed, whatever, once that whole process has worked forward. But I think one of the basic elements, and this is where I want to turn back particularly to our Czech colleague here, is that the EU is basically putting forward a tsunami wave of regulation. DSA, DST, data governance, AI, DMA, while the United States is still trying to figure out what it wants to do, if anything. There are bills up in Congress. I don't give any of them a real shot at passage at this point. But the TTC can serve as a place to talk about this lack of synchronicity in our legislative agendas, if you will, in our way of approaching these things. It is going to be very difficult if the DMA comes out and those who are identified as gatekeepers are only American firms. So that's not to say that the EU doesn't have the right to legislate as it wants, but there are always consequences to legislation, both domestically and internationally. But I think it is good to realize that this is the beginning. And I'll end that this is the beginning of the TTC. We have a lot to see about how it's going to go. I do hope that it will kind of help us get over the lack of conversation that we've had for the last 4 years about these issues. And that is a very important first step.
All right, thank you so very much for your introduction. You touched on data flows, which we can translate into privacy shield or Schrems, whichever word you want to use about this case, but the problem is it's not solved. I mean, Mark and everybody else, we understand in Slovenia, 80% of our companies are in one or the other way affected by the fact that we do not have a solution for data transfers. And this can only be solved on the level between Washington and Brussels and individual member states, but it has to be a package. So maybe even the Slovenian presidency and the next presidency and the Czech presidency, I hope it's not going to last that long, will have a crucial role to solve this issue. But we'll come back. We'll come back to that also because it is a crucial and important topic. Last but not least, Mr. Erixon, a question for you. You know, we've heard a lot about the CEE and the potential we have, not only within European Union because of our flexibility, our constant transformation and transition, which probably for 30 years has been going on because we have so much to catch in Eastern Europe compared to some other parts of European Union. But can you deliberate, can you comment on our role in strengthening the Transatlantic Alliance and also maybe bringing a more progressive, globally orientated legislation, regulation on the European Union table? There are different views within the European Union. We can slightly also comment on that. But the role of CEE is the most important part of my question, please.
All right, thank you very much, Jaka, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to come here to this fantastically beautiful part of Slovenia. So, I mean, to start where perhaps Mark ended, looking sort of at the structural transformation that has been going on in CEE economies for almost 30 years. What that has really done is to knock out a lot of activities, economic activities, even businesses and organizations that existed before. There has been a lot more disruption or creative destruction, to use the term of the economist Josef Schumpeter, in the CEE economy than it's been in the Western European economy over the last 30 years. And what that basically means is that in this part of the world there is a lot more new companies that have adopted pretty modern technologies that are pretty fast-moving, pretty entrepreneurial, and has been successful in connecting themselves to the big value chains of the European Union. The big economic value chains connecting themselves to other companies in other parts of Europe, indeed in other parts of the world as well, to become integral partners in the new type of economy that has grown. That is a pretty unique experience in itself because there aren't that many other parts of Europe that has done or gone through this particular phase. If we look at, for instance, Nordic countries, which are pretty successful in terms of digitalization and using the digital economy in order to change the economy, it's mostly happened through incumbent firms. So we have big firms, big industrial firms in particular, that has been successful in changing the way they operate, in changing the products, their technologies, the production structures they have in order to become much more closer to the frontier of technological development in the world. And then we have sort of more of a larger group of more continental European countries that haven't really moved in either direction, where you still have a lot of firms that are pretty distant from the frontier of technological change in the economy. And you don't have that entrepreneurial, vibrant startup culture where you can develop your own domestic economies and through them you get sort of the structural change you want to have in the economy. So when we are looking at sort of the big challenges that are facing the European economy with the digital economy right now, we can talk about sort of a lot of different policies. What happens in the EU with all these 20 digital fines that is going on. But the most biggest challenges is that the adaptation to new technologies is going too slow in Europe. That is the big challenge we have. And this is predominantly comes down to the fact that we have businesses that aren't using the opportunities that are there now in order to change the way they can run their economies. They are changing, of course, or everyone is changing, but it's going very, very slow. And we can find lots of explanations to why this is the case, why sort of the pressures to change in some parts of Europe isn't as strong as in other parts of the world. And it can come down to perhaps sort of cultural factors, like we are a bit skeptical or perhaps hesitant about privacy issues, sharing data, sharing our information with others. Yeah, I think there is some truth to that, especially if we compare Europe to, for instance, East Asian economies, where sort of the disruption of everyday life, how you basically share your
I guess whoever has a mobile.
All right, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. At any rate, I think we also, when we try to figure out why we have a slower pace with the adaptation in some parts of Europe than in other parts, it also comes down to a lot of policy factors, not so much with specific digital policies like GDPR or what we're now proposing, for instance, with the Digital Services Act or Digital Markets Act. It comes down to much more fundamental things. First problem, human capital. We have too few computer engineers, AI engineers in the entirety of Europe. There's a huge shortage of human capital supply that can help our companies to change. If you look around Europe today, you're going to find that just in an economy like Germany, there is now, today, around 150,000 offers on computer engineer jobs that aren't fulfilled. In order to hire an AI engineer in Germany, it takes around 8 months in order to find someone who can actually do the job. This is our number one problem. Our number two problem is that our capacity to generate not just educated human capital, people that can go in and work in organizations, but also people that can generate new innovative ideas coming from universities and the big R&D centers are not good enough. We don't have one EU university among the top 25 universities in the world. There is none of them. The first highly ranked European university from Munich comes at place 30. When you look at the quality of our R&D centers at the main universities, etc., you're going to find that we trail the capacity of universities and R&D centers in the rest of the world. And this is partly an issue about funding. We're not remotely close to the levels of funding to top-level frontier research as you can find in places like United States or China, for instance. Number third is our capital market regulations, which cuts the supply of entrepreneurial funding into our economy. That we are so dependent on large pension funds and traditional savings in order to supply our companies with fundings in order to innovate, which means that it gets very bureaucratic and very difficult to raise funding in order to start something new. These are our main three problems. And if Europe wants to up its game, if we want to be able to generate a lot more innovative capacity in the future that is going to come from Europe, we need to fix these three problems first. If we don't fix these problems, I'm afraid it doesn't matter what we do in terms of DMA or artificial intelligence, etc., because we're not going to be able to generate the outcomes that we want. Let me just close sort of on a final point and to tag on to what Fran was saying in her comments. We're now talking in Brussels and other parts of Europe about digital sovereignty or digital autonomy. So what does that mean? Well, the way I understand what significant politicians around in Europe are saying is that we are going to cut our dependence on other parts of the world for the supply of our innovative technology. So cut our dependence. I think this is a very, very dangerous road to go. Firstly, Europe's share of the world economy is declining for the good reason that the rest of the world is getting richer and richer. But that means that more technology, more innovations are going to happen outside Europe than inside Europe in the future. So if we want to cut our dependency on others, it basically means we are going to stop our firms to get access to frontier technologies that they need in order to compete globally. If we combine that with a wave of different types of digital regulations that when you go into them, there will be bits and pieces in them that I would support, and I think that's good. They're good. But when you look at how this is going to raise the level of regulation in Europe to use digital technologies to compete, you're also going to see that, well, if we, on the one hand, cut our dependence on others, we need to have stronger supply capacity internally. We need to substitute what we otherwise would sort of import from other parts of the world. But what this new level of restriction is going to do is going to reduce our capacity to really compete, to have the technologies that could, in a way, substitute what we otherwise would bring to Europe from other parts of the world. And sort of this mix, it just doesn't hold up. I mean, if you want to cut the dependence on the rest of the world, well, then you need to unleash a wave of deregulation in the European digital space, because otherwise we don't have anything to substitute the foreign technologies with. So I'll close there, and perhaps we can come back to these issues in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for those thoughts. And if I may just comment, and then I'll give the word to Mark, just sort of a lead. First of all, you mentioned universities, education. Both Mark and myself, and I'm pretty much everybody probably here, have been studying abroad, at least, or working abroad at least part of our lives. And some of us return. So it's also about making the environment competitive for people to come back from good American or other universities. We're never going to have a university probably in Slovenia as good as the ones that they have almost in every state in the US. But we need to make sure, and Mark, this is very important, I think, also for your ministry and the government in general, how to make this environment attractive for people to come back. It's attractive to go to Estonia. I've been there. Beautiful. You can get a great job. But it's really, I'm sorry, for a Slovenian, it's remote. It's really nicer, or for me, maybe as a Slovenian, to be here. We're in the heart of Europe. We just need to become attractive as they are when it comes to jobs for young people educated abroad. This is a comment, and I'll let you comment on that from Slovenian point of view. Just to touch one more thing, Transatlantic, digital files. Just take Digital Services Act as an example. I'm pretty sure Czech Republic will have to deal with it, even maybe a presidency later on. GDPR was the most amended act in the history of European Union. 3,999 amendments before it was adopted. Can you imagine what's going to happen with DSA? But I'll tell you what, a few large member states of the European Union who combined have 51% of the votes when it comes to drafting have one opinion, and the rest, or a big majority of European countries, have a different opinion on many parts of DSA. We will have to, and Slovenia is an honest broker now, but we will have to find a solution, and it's probably going to take quite some time to get there. But without inclusiveness of the global perspective, it's never going to work. So this is just a comment on your deliberation. Please, if you want to reply.
Just for one quick comment to actually criticize you, Jaka, for something you just said, which is that Slovenia can never build up universities that can compete with those in America. Why not? Why?
I'd be the happiest if that happens.
No, but I mean,
probably it can happen one day.
Let me just give you one example, which is that Well, if you look at business school, for instance, everyone wants to go to Harvard, Stanford, or this type of business school, pay a lot of fees. When you graduate from them, you're going to become sort of a high-paid executive in a large organization. If you look at the business school in the world that is most entrepreneurial, that generates most students and graduates, that starts new companies and go out and become successful entrepreneurs. Do you know which business school that is? Estonia Business School. So a small country, 1.3 million people, managed to attract a lot of international students that wants to become entrepreneurs. And it's one of the most innovative business schools in the world too. So just because you're small, just because you haven't been an advanced economy for such a long time as others, you can actually succeed. And if you have sort of the ambitions and you allow entrepreneurial people to succeed.
Thank you so very much, and may your words become gold. Mark, I'll let you comment on some things we heard about education, bringing people, competitiveness, Estonia, and please touch Poland as well. You've been living there, you lived there for a while, you understand their competitive mindset, not because Warsaw is big and Poland has 40 million people, but because there's also some other things we can learn from. And then I'm going to give the word to Marta, and she will explain to us a little bit more about why, for example, Poland is a good example in so many ways. Mark, please.
Thank you, Jaka. I don't think we have enough time to comment on everything that's been said today, but I would actually first talk about Europe. Because no matter whether we come from CEE or any other place of Europe, we're all Europeans, and this is our common debate and, in the end, a common future. Now, Fredrik touched upon the key issues facing Europe at the moment in the digital and entrepreneurial sense, and I'll just follow after him. First of all, there's an issue with our single market. It is not completed. Especially when it comes to services, we're not nearly there. And let me give you very specific examples. In Europe, you have hundreds of telcos. Every country has 3 or 4. How many of them do you have in the US? 5? Not even? How many in China? Maybe you haven't tried, but if you want to open a bank or insurance company branch in other EU country, it's practically impossible. It's a nightmare. So not only is our internal market divided by different languages, cultures, and traditions, it also have very significant formal and legal divisions. And that's something that's keeping us back because our companies are unable to scale across the continent. It's extremely costly to further your operations to other EU member states in the area of services. And that's the reason why we don't have European tech champions or global ones. Because if you can't expand in your domestic market, you're never gonna make it. Google, Microsoft, all the others, they first conquered their domestic market. And it was easy because US is a fully integrated single market. And I think this lies at the very core of the problems Europe faces in the digital space. Now, the second issue that you alluded to is definitely the lack of research funding and the lack of close collaboration between the academia and the private sector. And this is the secret of the Silicon Valley. It's businesses and researchers working hand in hand. And then, of course, it's the inability of European businesses to raise capital in Europe. Our capital markets are structurally totally different from the ones in the US or China. And they're not favoring risk-taking. They're not favoring startups or even scale-ups for that matter. So raising capital is something we need to work on absolutely. The last but not least is obviously attracting top talent. Fredrik mentioned, we have a lot of great talent. We don't have nearly enough of great talent. And unless we're going to boost our educational systems to start producing more IT engineers and open the borders to this kind of qualified workforce, we are going to be in big trouble. So these are the key issues that we need to address structurally if we want to become a digital champion of tomorrow in 5 or 10 years' time. The thing is that none of these issues can be resolved very quickly. It takes time to reform the educational system. It takes time to integrate the services markets. So this is something that we need to do. And if we start now, obviously it's going to be done earlier. Now, when it comes to the regulation and transatlantic partnership, we all know that we already live in the Asian century. Whether we like it or not, that's the fact of life. And even if the US and the EU work very closely together, it's not a given that we're going to prevail. It's not a given, but it's our best chance. So I would say that there's absolutely no alternative to transatlantic partnership, but I would even go one step further and say, why not go broader? Why not finding allies and partners in other places of the world, including Asia? Yesterday, India was mentioned. We have Australia, New Zealand, Japan, meaning that we need to broaden the technological dialogue that we have today. As we said in the beginning, the tech space is global. Let's, encourage broader dialogue. TTC is great, but that's not the whole world. We need to talk to others as well. Others have great ideas. Some of them even have very progressive digital regulations already. So we need to look beyond our transatlantic field. In the end, I would also say that we need regulation. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The digital industry is so huge. These services are so popular. They're used everywhere by everyone. Obviously, there needs to be greater regulation here. But we need a regulation that's forward-looking, that's prudent, and that doesn't stifle innovation. And this is all it is. We need to strike the right balance. We're working very hard on these files. And Peter, I sincerely hope that not all of them will land, of at least some of the big files there. And I think we're getting closer to some kind of compromise on various issues. And I would also emphasize one other thing that hasn't been mentioned before, the AI regulation. This is an incredibly important field. And here the economies of scale matter. And when I was alluding to the Asian century, I was alluding to the AI development. For AI, you need data. China has 1.3 billion people. India has 1.4. They got way more data than US and EU combined. So if we want to compete in the area of AI, we need to work together. And I think AI regulation here in the EU will definitely be one of our core priorities. And closely linked with this is the Data Governance Act. How can we organize data sharing of, especially in the area of industrial and non-personal data, in a way that can benefit European businesses as well as researchers? So these are the two files which I think are not that sexy as Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, but can make a huge difference in the years to come. Thank you.
Mark, thank you so very much. Just to kind of also make another comment on Slovenian presidency right now, but we're not going to talk in details. We are really honestly trying to bring a lot of different views together here. There's on DSA, DMA, within different member states. We hope Mr. Očko will bring it to the trialogue in most of those files, but you never know. At the end of the day, believe me, in European Parliament, there's going to be a huge number of amendments also at the end. But anyway, we're not going to go into details about a presidency. That's not why we're here.
Jaka, just one thing. Sorry
please.
For interrupting. There's nothing wrong with amending the regulation 2,000 times. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to be flexible. Things change. Views change. Technologies change. Let's be flexible. And even if we don't make it right to begin with, we'll have plenty of opportunities to enhance the regulation later down the road. So I'm a fan of amending this kind of stuff. Technology moves faster than any legislator. So let's just have our eyes open and our minds broad.
Thank you so very much. Any legislation that's passed in digital is passé when it's passed. We know that. But we know that for GDPR also. But there's also some good things, and of course you can always amend. But you're going to amend way more times if you're not going to be inclusive during the adoption of the first and second and third draft than if you are. And I'm not talking inclusive only transatlantic, I'm talking inclusive within the 27. And I mean, I'm going to be very brutally honest. A large member state like France has way different interests than a small, flexible member state like, I'm not going to say it, but some of them. And not in everything, but in some things.
And
but we need
legitimate.
that's legitimate, but we need to be inclusive now. And this is where we could applaud to our colleagues in perm representation in Europe, in Brussels from Slovenia right now, really doing a hard job and really working well on bringing those things together. And I hope some of them are watching because they're really good guys and girls. Okay, let's go on. Fortress Europe is something we'll be talking about in the legislative debate. Marta, I asked Mark because he was also living in Poland, in Warsaw. And, you know, I had a really great debate with a colleague of yours from Warsaw a couple of days ago when I was preparing for the panel. And I said, why are there so many really cool tech companies in Warsaw? I mean, the answer is because it's big, because there's 40 million people in Poland. But that's not the only answer. Budapest also is attractive. Prague could be attractive, but Warsaw actually got most of them. And he said, well, there's many reasons. And one of them is also that we've always been very open-minded to transatlantic cooperation, very open-minded to international capital, to investments, and that brought us where we are right now. Please, how would you comment, or what good experience, because you were very involved in attracting those companies to Poland, what good experience can you share with other CEE countries present here in Czech Republic and Slovenia from your experience? Marta, please.
Of course. So first, let me take a step back. I think Central Eastern Europe is still very new to the scene of big technology companies. So if you don't have a great insight into the region, you don't know where the talent is, you don't know where certain sectors, where certain industries within the digital industry could flourish, you just go to the biggest country in the region and you make it a hub. So it's unfortunately easy and not necessarily wise as that, but that takes me to the point of branding. And Central and Eastern Europe really needs to focus on that. I think there is a lot happening in that space, both on the company side, and myself and my team, we often feel that we work for Google, but we also kind of work for our region within those big global companies. But I think there are a lot of reasons for optimism. First of all, I think in parallel there is now a panel about 3Cs initiative that is also talking about connectivity in the region and joint projects. And it does feel like after many years that there is a platform, there is a forum that can be attracting investment, but could also definitely think about how to change the branding of the region, like how to update the branding after a very successful transition of the economy and many societal changes. I'm personally a huge fan of a concept that 3SI should have a secretariat, that this secretariat could be potentially based out of Brussels, and could also, in a way, campaign for the image of the region, which is already out there if you look at it closely, if you experience it, and if you live through it. So I think Google is very proud to be a front runner among tech companies who spotted the CEE opportunity very early. We keep on developing it. Placing our data center in Warsaw a few months ago was a big vote of confidence for the whole region. And again, there are different. This is not a very homogeneous region, and there are differences, but there are different offerings. It is obvious that if you're looking for placing new offices that require a lot of employees, you're most likely going to go for a bigger country where you have more access to talent, or you're going to be very specific in finding a city that has a strong university base. However, when you think about other types of investments, and in the technology world, we're not factories. We're not moving thousands of people, and we're not looking for big-scale pieces of land. It is, and I can see that process happening at Google and with other companies, that there's so much attractiveness attached to Slovenia, to Estonia, to Lithuania. The political trend also speaks for smaller countries in this region. So I have to say I'm very optimistic, and especially working at Google, I kind of feel we're getting into a very competitive field within CEE with our competitors, which is good, which is good news for the region, which gets my team to work harder. But it's great to see that we're not the only ones anymore. And even look at this conference. You have 3 big tech companies present here, supporting the conference, but also being present in all those discussions. And it's very pleasant to see my colleagues from other companies really compliment on the level of the discussion and commitment to digital growth and policy. And getting back to purely why there is so much interest, certainly economic growth that has been mentioned, that makes an impression with all the teams that are looking at the global scale of growth. Genuine interest and commitment. So it's hard to see so many leaders who come to one place like they did for this conference, and to mention the word digital technology transformation in every third sentence, and it all seems to be happening intentionally. It's not repeating just the talking points. We see a lot of commitment via public policy that is happening across the region, via tech adoption, via commercial projects that we also observe. I think we already brought up the question of various interests between, for example, France and other member state, and it's not only about politics, it's also about legacy industries that have different volume of impact in various countries, and certainly CEE has much more brevity and has much more encouragement to be active in the field, because also there's not that much pressure coming from old legacy industries. That's why there is so much hunger, and that's an opportunity. That's something we recognize. We see a lot of pushback across Europe from other industries that are not existent in CEE. So when CEE has a choice, do we want to innovate or do we want to benefit a legacy industry? They're most likely going to go for innovation. And last but not least, in the past 5 years, this region has stepped up in very impressively in terms of being a contributor to EU policy thinking at a national level and in Brussels. And it's very encouraging for companies to see that there are member states that are open to talk, that are open to still fight for the digital single market. That is indeed sadly forgotten term and what happened to it, and it feels like DSM is now transformed to digital sovereignty, and like that's not what we wanted, that's not what we agreed on. And I would love to see DSM coming back to the agenda and being as popular as in its heyday, because there is something to fight for.
Thank you very much, Marta, for that. Maybe just briefly to comment, because we said digital single market, on the attempts that the country of origin principle should be replaced. I mean, this is something that's really on the table right now. And for those of you maybe who are not so familiar with the term country of origin from a legal point of view, is which legislation will be applied, the legislation of the country that you are in. Oh, now the lights are off and the sounds are off. We must have a topic of great interest, I would say, probably, because we're getting all this.
More technology, just more
yeah.
electricity.
Anyway, so the country of, maybe some technicians can help us, guys, please. Guys, please. Could you stand up and just try to turn the light on?
Actually,
I mean,
that's more sustainable.
yeah.
We're saving energy. That's part of our green agenda.
All right, guys, but you can see us, you can hear us. So let me just conclude this country of origin. Either is the country, the legislation is applied by the country legislation where the company, the seat, the registered seat is in, or by the country where the service is provided, the target country. And you know, being a 27-member state union, this is opening a lot of new questions on the legal side, thoughts. This is on the table during the second draft now, for example, of the Digital Services Act. I don't know how it's going to go on, but definitely this is one of the topics that are becoming also a reality in European Union. When I was talking to a colleague from the Polish Digital Coalition, and you know, I said, what are the 5 most important topics of the Polish Digital Coalition, sort of a Polish version of our Strategic Council and our digital coalition we have in Slovenia as well. He said, number 1, digital skills. Number 1, we need to work on digital skills. Digital literacy is number 1 for everything we're talking about today. Forget about legislation, forget about technology, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, augmented reality. If my father cannot order a pizza because he's 80 years old and there's nobody else but me to teach him how to do that, there's a generational gap. And kids on telephones 4 hours a day playing games, that's not digital skills. That's something completely different. So digital skills. Cybersecurity, he put on number 2. Interesting, cybersecurity. Number 3, he put 5G. 5G, a topic of great geostrategic importance, but most of all, technology. Then he mentioned, interestingly, copyrights. Copyrights, EUCD, as the 4th most important topic. Then he went on to DSA, DMA, DGA, and all those huge files we have on the table, and which are waiting for our colleagues from Czech Republic probably to finalize. And the last one was taxes. Taxes. He didn't mean digital taxes. We're talking about digital taxes all the time on OECD level, EU level. He was talking about taxes in Poland. He was saying, I have an engineer which I can pay this much because our tax rate is this much. And you know, Mark, we've been talking about competitiveness of Slovenia at AmCham and other Chamber of Commerce events for now, Mark, 5 or 10 years. It always comes to those fundamental questions of competitiveness, taxes, educational system, environment, safety. And those are also very important things when we're talking about attracting people to come to work here. Mr. Očko, just to wrap up before we're going to turn to the podium for questions. We've heard a lot today about CEE region, our importance, our specifics maybe even within European Union. Can you be practical to wrap those thoughts up? I mean, how can we work as a team? How can we work as a regional player? We are countries of 1.8 million, 2 million, 4 million, 5 million. I mean, we're nothing. We're smaller than a member, than a state within Germany or France. How can we become a team player? How do you see this from the Czech point of view?
Yeah, I will answer the question. First, I'm happy that you have mentioned the country of origin. This is something that shows what's actually happening, and actually you probably all know about the new French law, and it's something we actually check it, and by that I probably will come to answering your question. Czech Republic was the only member state that actually issued a statement against adopting this law in France, because you have this opportunity, because it's breaching e-commerce directive. Actually, we got so many calls from Macron office that I actually could not imagine. And actually, finally, we just agreed that we will not put it in as an official statement, but just opinion of the Czech Republic, like in a less formal way, not to actually postpone adoption of this law, this law on illegal content in France. So. Actually, this law actually goes against this principle, and goes, in my opinion, it's a breach of e-commerce directive at this moment. So, by the way, speaking about future-proof laws, we shouldn't forget about e-commerce directive that is existing for 20 years. Actually, proved to be very well working. And that said, is that of course attempts like this, and it was our mistake that we actually did not code anymore, do not have any chance to survive. Actually, yeah? We think that it's bad. We think that it's precedent for DSA. We think that the country of origin is really in stake now, and I think big tech should be worried. But if only one country says it's bad, it's we always lose. So we need. I fully agree that we need to act as a team player, and we have a few platforms. We have actually the V4 platform. I think works very well. Sometimes in like extended format. Actually, under the Polish presidency of V4 Visegrad Group, we actually we enjoyed a lot of communication with our digital colleagues. Also under Czech presidency, we organized a few hopefully nice events. Actually, I hope that we will also work more with the platform that is called D9+. That actually one more thing that we maybe would like to say is that we would like to organize a D9+ meeting in Prague in the first half of this year, because in the second half of this year it will be in Luxembourg. And D9+ are actually digitally like-minded countries, so this is something that maybe we could should revive. And of course we should work more on actually finding partners outside of EU. Actually, in digital, we cannot. The borders are not at the borders of the EU. So actually, I am very happy for that TTC was created, but we have all big expectations. So let's work together also during our presidencies to make it really working. And I agree with what the minister has said. In the beginning, let's speak about other partners. Actually, India might be a very nice idea, and maybe let's include other ones. And one more thing we shouldn't forget is WTO. So WTO still exists, and in the area of free market, liberal market, and world trade. It is still a very important platform, and of course WTO also now is involved in like the digital aspects of trade. So these are all platforms that actually are existing. We do not have to create many more, in my opinion. We just need to be engaged and make these platforms working. This is, I think, very important.
Thank you very much. Dr. Burwell, you wanted to comment on that?
So on the question that you raised of how can Central Europe cooperate more, last year at the Atlantic Council, we did a report that looked specifically at that in terms of digitalization. And we tried very hard not to focus on should country X build a server farm or something like that, but actually on cross-border issues and cooperation. If you look at these issues from the perspective of the United States, Europe has unfortunately come to mean Germany and France. And so I think that there is an interest in having Central Europe punch above its weight. Right now, I would say it's punching below its weight on these particular issues. And it is in part because it's much more disaggregated. But one of the interesting things that our task force came up with was actually dedicating some funds to the mechanisms of cooperation, to the process of cooperation. So when we did interviews with people, now it may have changed since then, this was a year ago and it was the beginning of the pandemic, we were surprised at how so few of the digitalization ministers met with their CEE counterparts in a CEE format, as opposed to going to Brussels. And I think that this is something, dedicating some funding to make sure that your working groups, your expert groups, within your ministries, that the digitalization ministers have opportunities to meet, to actually ask, so, do we agree on the DSA? Do we agree on the AI reg? Or at least a subgroup of us agree? It won't be all countries on every issue. That's just impossible. But that's the kind of thing that I think would allow Central Europe to play a larger role. There will be shifting coalitions, that's just the way the EU works. The other things that we looked at included things like university hubs and technical hubs. And I think, you know, if you go back to the land-grant university experience in the United States, which these were universities set up in every state to help farmers initially, but they have become hubs of reaching out to local industry. But many of the countries here are too small and don't have the budget to support that. But a couple of them together could do that. But it doesn't have to be all together. It can be a few who are, for whatever reason, compatible. So I would just encourage people to think about those types of issues, but also to understand that there is real value in the process of coordination. It's not something, you can't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I think we should collaborate a lot more. You have to actually build it. And I think the TTC is an example of that. Will we see hard issues resolved at the first one? Probably not. I hope I'm wrong. I hope there'll be something on data transfers, but I'm not a betting woman and I'm not gonna bet on it. So, but with time, these types of things can work.
But thank you so much. You said before that data transfers, data flows, shrimps or whatever, is a technical legal issue. I would slightly disagree. I think the solution at the end of the day will be very political and will have to be on the level of Biden administration and the commission. I mean, if we're going to involve 27 information commissioners into solving this issue, we're never going to solve it, because you know how it is with information commissioners. They're great, they're very strict. If they strictly apply the definitions of GDPR, we're never going to solve this. So there will have to be a political solution. Either that's TTC or some other summit we're going to have or whatever, but this must be resolved. I mean, this is really becoming dangerous for companies, I can tell you, for companies. I mean, they are doing business in a gray, not a gray, it's almost black, some of them, area now, legally. So we need to really focus on this. Please comment just a few more words on that.
So I think, you know, I wish you were right. But the problem is that whatever agreement is come up with is going to go before the courts immediately. There will be a Schrems 3, okay? And I think that the interpretation that we have seen from the European Data Protection Board of how Schrems 2 should be implemented is much more legal and rigid than what anyone in the United States was expecting at the time. So the question is that we have two systems that, to be frank, are not compatible in the way that they are working in terms of surveillance and the redress that we will give to other citizens. And in fact, that is something that certainly the French government, but other European governments are undertaking on their own. They would be in the same pickle if they weren't in the EU. But I know there have been efforts to make a political agreement. The problem is that it's going to have to go to the court. It will inevitably go to the court again.
You know, probably, yeah. But okay, we're not going to go into too legal. Let's not go into too many legal details about that. But there will have to be a solution, as we agree, ASAP. Okay, so I think we have about 8-9 minutes left, so it's time for the podium. We have some microphones for you, so please, you can just stand up when you ask a question and introduce yourself. We'll be very happy. Thank you.
Paweł Zerka, European Council on Foreign Relations. It's a fascinating panel, very wise voices. It's a pity that the other side of the of the conversation is not present or underrepresented. I mean, the mentioned French or even German speakers. It's not that I sympathize with the with the German or French perspective, but I feel that if we had a French or German speaker, what they would say first, they would disagree with Fredrik that it's about cutting our dependencies. They would say that it's about reducing those interdependencies which are asymmetrically disadvantageous for us. And then they would also ask you, Fredrik, if your agenda for a reasonable digital or tech sovereignty, which I like a lot, whether it's enough, because it feels like enough from economic perspective, but is it sufficient security-wise? They would mention that it's not just China, it's also the US, where we could imagine another president, not just a couple of years from now. And therefore, they would mention 5G, data transfer. They would, they will simply wonder whether there isn't something that needs to be done to reduce Europe's asymmetric interdependencies. And therefore, my question to you, but mostly to Fredrik, is whether you reject that reasoning completely, or whether there are elements of that reasoning that you could accept, given that those economic channels, but also possibly tech channels, are becoming increasingly the channel in which interdependence is being weaponized by others.
Thank you so much, Fredrik. Before you answer, is there any other question? Because I would like to take 2 or 3, then we answer them. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck with one. Please, Mr. Bogovic, if I recognize you under the mask, member of European Parliament, please.
Thanks, Franz Bogovic is my name. I'm a member of European Parliament, Regi, Agri, and also ITRE committee. So I'm quite close to these topics. Great panel, but I will raise the question about one topic we didn't spoke about, but I work on it last 5 years. It's how to fulfill digital gap in rural areas. We had yesterday here Ms. Šuica. She prepared Rural Agenda 2040, and I work in last 5 years on this topic. Question of depopulation, digital gap, gap of skills in rural areas, and we really work hardly on smart villages concept, and we combine this also with Green Deal, and we cannot imagine resilient Europe without digitalized rural areas. And we really work hard on many topics, and my question go in this direction. What do you think about this? And thanks to our government, we also organize, my office and Minister for Agriculture, a conference. Minister Andrijanič will be there, where we will speak. This is one event of Slovenian presidency, and we will point out this question, digitalization in rural areas. It's connected with the energy sector, e-health, all other things, you know all about this. So my question, what do you think about this topic, and how to fulfill this gap, which is very big also in skills, connectivity, and other topics? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bogovic. Is there one more question I can take, and then we're going to go to answers? No. Then, Fredrik, I would ask you kindly to answer the first question, and anybody else, of course, is welcome to comment on that also, please.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul, for your question. Good to see you again. It's a while ago. I see you still ever the diplomat. So, I mean, look, I don't know which people you talk to, but sort of the French ministers or the French civil servants I speak to, they're pretty open about what they want to do. And that also includes politicians and officials from other countries, that we can find sort of grand international relations theories for describing what they want to do, but at the end of the day, it comes down to cutting the dependence on others. And if we walk through various forms of strategies and policy proposals that have come out from Brussels over the past, especially the past 2 years, but sort of the past 5 years, I don't think we need to be in much doubt that there is an overall ambition which is backed up by policies which has the intention of reducing European dependence on other parts of the world. We can have a discussion whether this is good or bad, but I don't think there is sort of a real conversation to have here about interpretations of where some people want to go. That doesn't mean that everyone agrees with it. Doesn't mean that the entire European Commission agrees with it. It means there's a big fight going on inside the Commission, and over the past years, that fight has been won by those who wants to cut dependence more than those who don't like that concept very much. But that, of course, is something which can change. My proposal is pretty simple, and it is this. If Europe wants to be a highly competitive player at the frontier of global technological development, it has to do a lot of things internally in its own economy. The factors I mentioned, plus the factors that Mark went into in his comment about the digital single market, taking away barriers that allows European firms to expand faster and cheaper in Europe than what is currently possible. It means a lot more when it comes to moderating the grand political ambitions that exist in many of the proposals that have come out of late on the DSA, DMA, AI, for instance. There are good pieces in many of those. But at the end of the day, we also have to recognize that there are pieces in those proposals that aren't very good and that are going to have pretty substantial consequences for what you can do in Europe in order to develop your capacities here. And when we deal with this, I think we quite often we have a wrong mental model. When we think about AI, we think about Google, we think about Facebook, we think about IBM, Microsoft, Apple. We don't think about ABB, we don't think about Scania, we don't think about Volkswagen. These are the companies that are the most significant digital exporters in Europe. They are the ones that are now kicking and screaming towards various officials in Brussels and saying, if this is what you're going to put through on artificial intelligence, it means we have to pack up our research capacity to improve energy systems in Europe, move that to another part of the world, because under these rules we simply can't develop the new products that we need to do here. It's not Google, it's not Facebook. This is sort of hard industry companies that, confronted with these type of regulations, will find that they can't do business in Europe anymore. And I think so coming back to my main proposal, which is that if we are cutting the dependency on others and we're not having a policy in Europe which is going to lead to a real energy boost in our innovative capacity, it means that we're going to get saddled with poor technology, that other countries, other businesses in the world will have access to better technologies than we have here in Europe. And I don't think that's a good proposition. Cybersecurity is a bit different. I don't see a conflict between being strong on security and being an open market. And that will entail looking at different type of relations where there are risks to our import structures, our broad supply structures of a specific technology. This is what's been going on in Brussels in different ways over the past couple of years. We've been either trying to understand sort of COVID-19 related goods. Are we too dependent on some countries there or some suppliers there? On key technologies, on key technological ecosystems, are we more dependent on some countries there? Semiconductors, the crisis we have right now with industrial firms around Europe, which is closing production this week because they can't access semiconductors.
Fredrik, we're running out of time, so
I know.
Please.
I just have 10 minutes left in my speech, so no, I'm going to close on this point. So the point is this: absolutely, we can have a discussion about what needs to be done there. But if we think that the way to resolve this will be raising the drawbridge against other countries, I think we are fooling ourselves, because what we need to do is generate the capacity internally in Europe to come up with these firms, become an attractive investment place where these semiconductors producers in the world, where they're going to invest more and where they're going to put more R&D sources so we can have more strategic capabilities here. This has nothing to do with closing the borders to others. It's about our own capacity to generate competitive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Fredrik, very much. Mark, maybe just very shortly to the question or the remarks of Mr. Bogovic, and then we're going to wrap up our panel as well, please.
So I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. I'll comment on what Fran has mentioned, and she has a great point. I think the collaboration within the CEE hasn't been stronger for a very long time. I think there's still need to deepen it, but what we can do, and let's be action-oriented, you know what? We'll organize a summit of digitalization ministers from CEE here in Slovenia. Petr, you'll be invited. Yes, absolutely. So let's do this, and let's start bringing this region together also when it comes to digital policies. Now, I would also like to thank Fran and the Atlantic Council for your amazing contribution to the 3 Cs initiative and our regional collaboration in the past years. I think it's a good platform to do even bigger stuff in the future. Now, Franz, I would like to thank you twice. First for the question, and second of all, for your concept of smart villages. And I think it's brilliant. I've been supporting you from day one. And I think it's absolutely crucial that we use a large chunk of the RRF funds to increase connectivity of rural areas. And that's something we will be doing in Slovenia, because we are dedicating a good portion of these funds to ensure that everyone in the rural areas has access to broadband. And we also had a very good discussion yesterday with the representatives of AIB, who had also just dedicated another 100 million euros to make sure that the broadband comes to every Slovenian household as soon as possible. So we're doing something very specific in this regard. Now, to your point about people, especially from small countries, not coming back. And we're talking about the ones that are highly skilled, well-educated. You know what? We're doing 2 things. First of all, we're going to increase grants for young people to study at top universities abroad. We believe that that's amazing experience for young folks. We've been privileged, Jaka, to have this experience, but we also are doing a lot to make sure that these people come back. So we'll be introducing tax breaks for employers here in Slovenia that will employ this kind of skill, this kind of people when they return. We'll also open up an office that will help them and their families sort out all the administrative and other procedures that are related to their returns. So we will do everything we can to make sure that we get those brains back. And we're not just talking about Slovenian experts. We're open for business. We're global. We're trying to build a global Slovenia, which means that everyone's welcome. Now, at the end, I would just like to say that I started out with this point, talking about the Congress of European Superpowers 200 years ago that took place in Ljubljana. I don't think it was a coincidence that they met here. I don't think it was a coincidence that Presidents Bush and Putin met for the first time in Slovenia. I think it's a good reason for that. Slovenia, in fact, is a crossroads of east and west, of north and south. We're culturally and strategically somewhere in the middle. And I think this will help us in the next couple of months of the remaining presidency to find reasonable compromises with our French friends, with our German friends, as well as our friends in the CEE. So I remain very hopeful and optimistic. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much for those conclusive words, with which we're going to end our very, very interesting panel. Thank you so much to our dear panelists. Thank you for being with us for an hour and a half. Thanks also to the virtual audience. See you at one of the next panels. Have fun at the remaining day of Bled Strategic Forum, and hope to see you next year again. Thank you.
It's good that you were making the points that I was about to make.
you so much. Great information.